There is a certain tightness in the chest that comes when you are in a room full of people, smiling, laughing, nodding, and yet, inside, you are vanishing. I have felt it more times than I want to admit. On the surface, I was accepted. I was fitting in. But somewhere deeper, something in me was suffocating. This is the strange contradiction of our lives. We spend so much time trying to fit in, thinking it will finally give us belonging. But fitting in is not belonging. Fitting in is performance. Belonging is presence. Fitting in is exile. Belonging is home. I didn't know that for most of my life. I thought they were synonyms, two ways of saying the same thing. I thought belonging was earned by shaping myself until others nodded with approval. I thought they were synonyms, two ways of saying the same thing. I thought belonging was earned by shaping myself until others nodded with approval. If I mirrored their laughter, if I softened my opinions, if I wore the clothes that kept me invisible, if I spoke just enough to avoid suspicion, but never enough to cause offense, then I thought maybe then I would belong. But here's the truth I can't escape anymore. When you contort yourself to fit, you may gain a place in the circle, but you lose your place in yourself. And that is the harshest exile of all. There is a night I remember vividly. I was younger, sitting in a group that I desperately wanted to accept me. I remember the way my shoulders were pulled up tight, the way I laughed at jokes that unsettled me, the way I nodded along to things that did not sit right in my chest. Outwardly, I was blending in. Inwardly, I was breaking apart. My silence that night felt like a betrayal I could not undo. By the time I walked out, the cool night air hit me like a rebuke. I smiled until I closed the car door, and then the smile fell away. What I had traded for their approval was my own voice. That is what fitting in does. It trades your truth for their applause. It keeps you in the room, but casts you out of yourself. So let me ask you, as I ask myself now with more honesty than I once dared, where have you mistaken fitting in for belonging? Where have you accepted exile from yourself in exchange for the fragile comfort of being liked? The world around us sells the lie that assimilation is the same as love. That to be embraced, you must smooth the edges, quiet the wilderness, and wear the mask. But what if the very opposite is true? What if true belonging begins not when you erase yourself, but when you refuse to? Belonging is not earned by pretending. Belonging is granted when you stand as you are, unmasked, unhidden, unapologetic. And yes, that means you might stand apart, you might even stand alone. But better to stand alone in truth than to sit crowded in a room where every smile you wear is borrowed. Fitting in is exile, belonging is home. The lie that shaped so much of my life was simple. If I just fit in, then I will be loved. I learnt it early. In school, I figured out quickly which answers pleased the teacher, which behaviors won praise. If I wanted to avoid ridicule, I tucked away my strangeness, the thoughts that felt too odd, the feelings that came too strong. In family life, I learned what was acceptable and what was not, and I adjusted myself to keep the peace. Later, in friendships, I mirrored the tastes of others, laughed when they laughed, frowned when they frowned. In workplaces, I swallowed my opinions when they threatened to rock the boat. Each time, I thought I was buying love. Each time, I thought I was securing belonging. But what I was really doing was exiling myself. The lie whispers that if you don't fit in, you'll be cast out. But here is the painful truth I only discovered after decades. If you erase yourself to stay, you are already cast out. The rejection doesn't come from them. It comes from within. You may remain in the group, but you no longer remain in yourself. The tragedy is how subtle this exile can be. At first, it feels like nothing more than a small compromise. You laugh at a joke that unsettles you. You swallow a word that wants to be spoken. You nod along when you disagree. It seems harmless, but compromise by compromise, the silence grows, the mask thickens. One day, you wake up and realize that while you have been accepted everywhere, you are known nowhere. You have been applauded by many, but recognized by none. And worst of all, you have become a stranger to yourself. That is the exile of fitting in. You are visible in the room, but invisible in your own soul. I remember once wearing shoes that were too tight. They pinched at first, then ached, then throbbed. But I kept them on because they looked right, because they matched, because no one else could see the pain. Fitting in feels like that, outwardly polished, inwardly blistered. You endure it until the moment you can finally take them off. And when you do, the relief is overwhelming. Shoulders drop, breath deepens, pain releases. That is what belonging feels like. The moment you no longer have to squeeze yourself into a shape that doesn't fit. Belonging is being accepted as you are, unmasked. It is the air released when the shoes finally loosen. It is the dignity of standing distinct, like a rock that refuses to erode into the shoreline. The waves may crash, the water may try to smooth it down, but it holds its shape. And that is its strength. The world will tell you that fitting in is safety. But fitting in is exile. The only safety worth having is the safety of being known as you are. And here is the detour. Belonging doesn't come when you erase yourself. It comes where truth is welcomed. It comes when you risk the mask dropping, when you stand unshaped by the demands of others, when you speak, even if your voice shakes, when you walk away rather than betray yourself. It comes when you dare to believe that love is not earned by pretending, but by presence. So I say again, with the weight of memory behind me, fitting in is exile. Belonging is home. There was a season of my life when I wanted nothing more than to be included. I can still feel the anxiety in my chest as I drive to gatherings, rehearsing lines in my head the way an actor rehearses a script. Don't say too much, don't disagree, don't reveal what you really care about. Keep it light, keep it safe, keep it acceptable. And so I played the part. One night in particular stayed with me. It was winter, the air sharp as I walked into a friend's house. The living room glowed warm, a circle of people laughing around drinks, the kind of laughter that swells when everyone is performing the same role. We are alike, we are safe, we belong. I wanted to believe I was one of them. I wanted to believe I was inside the circle, but here is the truth. I wasn't. I remember someone making a remark that cut against what I held dear. It was small, a throwaway line, but it struck me. I felt the surge of words rise in me, a different perspective, a defense of something sacred, but I swallowed them. My throat tightened, my mouth went dry, but I stayed silent. The conversation moved on, laughter resuming, the circle intact. Outwardly, I had succeeded and I had fit in. Inwardly, I felt sick. I sat there, nodding, smiling, sipping my drink, but the weight of my silence pressed heavier with each minute. I had exiled myself in order to be accepted. I had bought a seat at the table with the currency of my own voice. Later that night, driving home, I felt hollow. The headlights stretched over the wet asphalt, but I barely noticed the road. What I noticed was the ache in my chest. I had thought fitting in would soothe the loneliness. Instead, it deepened it, because I realized something devastating. You can be surrounded by people, applauded by them, welcomed into their laughter, and still be utterly alone. That was the night I began to see the difference. Fitting in had cost me my belonging. The memory still shames me, but it also freed me. Because when I finally admitted what happened, I saw that my silence was not only about that night. It was a mirror of my whole life. Again and again, I had shaped myself to fit. In classrooms where I echoed answers instead of offering my own. In workplaces where I softened my critique to blend with the team. Even in relationships where I laughed at what wounded me. Each time, the result was the same. Outward acceptance. Inward exile. And here is the painful irony. Each time I chose to fit, I was convinced I was securing belonging. I thought I was buying love. What I was buying was survival. And survival without self is a slow death. The truth hit me in small ways. A glance in the mirror where the man looking back seemed strangely faded. A journal entry I could barely finish because I had forgotten how to speak honestly to myself. A moment in conversation where I caught myself parroting phrases I didn't even believe. Piece by piece, I had been vanishing. And so the costly confession is this: I once shaped myself to fit and I vanished in the process. Belonging, I learned too late, was never earned by erasure. It was waiting for me the moment I dared to stand unmasked. The longer I live, the more convinced I am that belonging and fitting in are not distant cousins, but direct opposites. To fit in is to exile yourself for the sake of acceptance. To belong is to be accepted because you refuse to exile yourself. This realization did not come easily, and it came through years of exile, years of masks, years of rehearsed lines and swallowed words. But exile, if endured long enough, has a way of pushing you to desperation. And desperation, if faced honestly, has a way of clarifying truth. The truth is this: belonging is not something you earn. Belonging is something you discover when you stop performing. We live in a culture obsessed with assimilation. Schools reward conformity. Workplaces reward compliance. Families often reward silence. The subtle message seeps in: if you want love, you must adjust. If you want safety, you must pretend. If you want to stay, you must erase. And so we obey, we perform, we adjust. We exile ourselves in order to remain in the circle. But here's the contradiction that finally cracked me open. You can win the crowd and still lose yourself. And when you lose yourself, the crowd cannot give you back what you surrendered. Belonging, by contrast, is freedom. It is the air released when you loosen the too tight shoes. It is the deep breath after the mask falls away. It is the shoulders finally dropping when you realize you no longer have to perform. Belonging does not require sameness. It requires authenticity. It does not demand you erode into the shoreline. It asks you to stand like the rock, distinct, unshaped by the waves that crash against you. The waves will try, they will always try, but if you remain, if you refuse to erode, then the dignity of belonging will be yours. I once thought fitting in would protect me from loneliness. I see now it only deepened it. Loneliness is not the absence of company. Loneliness is the absence of self. And fitting in erases self faster than isolation ever could. The cultural lie says, if you don't fit in, you'll be cast out. The truth is sharper. If you erase yourself to fit in, you're already cast out. So here is the turn, the detour, the road. I wish I had taken earlier. Fitting in is exile, belonging is home. To belong is to stand unmasked, to risk rejection, to dare solitude, and to discover that what remains is real. To belong is to be embraced, not because you matched the script, but because you dared to tear it up. To belong is to find love in the place where you no longer barter your soul for applause. And so I no longer chase the comfort of fitting in. I choose the risk of belonging. I choose the rock that stands distinct. I choose the relief of shoes that finally fit. I choose the freedom of walking border roads that belong to no state because they belong to themselves. Fitting in is exile, belonging is home. And that home begins the moment the mask drops. I have spent so much of my life chasing circles that never held me, chasing rooms where I thought my place would be secured if only I could smooth myself enough, bend myself enough, erase myself enough. But what I see now is that belonging was never in those rooms at all. Belonging was waiting in the places where I dared to stop performing. When I look back, I realized that the moments I felt most alive, most human, most at home in myself, were never the moments I was applauded for fitting in. They were the moments I stood as I was, even if it cost me approval. The night I finally admitted a truth that ended a friendship but saved my own soul. The day I stood in a meeting and said what I believed, knowing the room would bristle. The quiet hours at home when I stopped shaping my words for an imagined audience and wrote them honestly in my journal, only for myself. Those moments felt costly, but they also felt like oxygen. And oxygen is the first sign of belonging. It gives you the appearance of love, but never its substance. It gives you the sound of laughter, but not its meaning. It gives you the comfort of company, but not the safety of being known. And over time, counterfeit corrodes. It leaves you hollow. Belonging, on the other hand, can feel frightening because it asks you to risk. It asks you to risk rejection, to risk loneliness, to risk standing apart. But here is the paradox. The very moment you risk rejection is the moment you open the door to true belonging. Because only then can those who remain with you love what is real, not the mask. Belonging begins where pretending ends. And so I ask you, where in your life have you mistaken fitting in for belonging? Where are you still nodding along when your heart says no? Where are you laughing at jokes that wound you? Where are you squeezing into shoes that do not fit, smiling through the blisters, convinced that the pain is worth the applause? And What would it look like to stop, to take the shoes off, to let the silence break, to speak the words you've swallowed for too long? To risk being cast out of the group, only to discover that you are finally welcomed home to yourself. This is not an easy road. The culture punishes authenticity as often as it praises it. You may lose circles, you may lose rooms, you may even lose relationships. But what you will gain is presence, dignity, the relief of no longer being in exile from yourself. And in that relief, you will discover that you were never as alone as you feared. Because true belonging always waits on the other side of authenticity. Fitting in is exile, belonging is home, and home is where you can finally breathe. Fitting in costs less in the moment, but it costs everything in the end. You can spend years wearing masks, shaping yourself, nodding, laughing, silencing, and at the end, discover that the person who was loved never truly existed. That is the exile I would not wish on anyone. Belonging is different. Belonging is costly up front. It may demand courage, rejection, solitude. But the reward is immeasurable. Because when you belong, you know the love you receive is real. You know it is your own face being seen, your own voice being heard, your own self being welcomed home. So here is what I offer as a blessing. Do not confuse fitting in with belonging. Fitting in is exile. Belonging is home. Do not erase yourself for the fragile comfort of acceptance. Do not exile yourself for the illusion of safety. Belong where you can be unmasked. Belong where you can breathe. Belong where your truth does not need to hide. You may stand alone for a time. You may feel the sting of rejection. But better to stand on the hill with the wind on your face, unmasked, unhidden, unexiled, than to sit in a crowded room applauded for a performance that costs you your soul. Belonging is not about being the same. It is about being free. It is not about dissolving into the shoreline. It is about standing like a rock, distinct, uneroded, dignified. So when the temptation comes to fit in, remember, fitting in is exile, belonging is home, and home is worth everything. Belong where you can be unmasked. Belong where you do not vanish. Belong where you are seen, known, loved, not for the performance, but for the presence. And when you find that place, even if it is only within yourself at first, may you know that it is enough. Belong where you can be unmasked. That is home.